Boom. Yep.
I had this guy work for me one time, and he was a good guy, but his truck blew up, and he had bad. He was in recovery, so he couldn't get a loan, he couldn't do anything, and so he asked me if he could borrow a few $1,000s to buy a new vehicle and then work off the debt. So I'm wondering, according to that logic, was I when I gave him that money and allowed him to work off his debt, did that make me an evil slave owner? Or was I helping feed his family and helping him survive? Was
Right.
I doing good? Or
Right. You
according
would
to
have
their
been.
logic, was I, did I become an evil slave owner at that point?
Yeah, you would have been called an Eved by the an ancient Near Eastern Israelite. You would have been called an Eved, or that person you hired would have been called an Eved. That's the point. That's the distinction they ignore. They
Yeah,
ignore those details. They look at the word slavery and suggest that, well, this person must have been there against their will. And let me just evaluate the rest of the text and the stipulations based on this presupposition that's a false one.
sure. And if he,
You,
and if the guy decided after he'd worked off only a part of his debt that he didn't want to work off any more of that debt,
you would take them to court.
and then back at a time where there was no court or where there was no police, you'd probably do the same thing that maybe a bookie would do today with any illegal debt, was they'd send over some large debt collectors and they would physically get you to reconsider,
Yep.
right? I mean, that's and if today, if we had some sort of economic collapse where everything was shut down and no more government, we would go right back to doing the same thing. You either make good on your debt, or the big debt collectors are going to come and physically convince you to pay that debt. I don't understand
Well,
why it's so
well, they'll
hard for
just
these
send
Spot
people to
the
on.
understand.
they'll just garnish your wages. I think would be the
Yeah, yeah, they'll garnish your wages.
garnish his wages. I think that would be the legal way to do it. But yeah, you owe if you owe the mob money, yeah, they're gonna come
Yeah, they're going to come and they're going to get it. And but the
collect you.
difference about that, back at a time where at least at least the servants in Israel had laws that would actually protect them too. Like if someone did try to get that debt money by physical means, that they had something to worry about. They had to be careful. They couldn't just do whatever they wanted.
I think also to bring out important to bring out that wasn't brought up in a debate is the system that they had was more similar to what Sicily ran, the type of social or social economic system that Sicily had, whereby the family members were brought up. Well, if I owe money, why should my daughter pay? Well, excuse me. Try that with the Coleones. Try
Yeah.
that with the Barzinis. So it was more of an enclave, a type of family lived in this region. This actually, if you watch The Godfather, you will learn that the Corleone family actually owned a town called called Corleone. That's why the town was named after their last name, and their entire family lived in that town in Sicily. So if one person in that Corleone family owed a debt, guess what? You owe everyone owes the debt. And
Right.
someone is going to pay it until the debt is paid in full, whether it be an aunt, whether it be an uncle, whether it be a daughter. In America, we're more of an individualistic society. So we feel it's wrong to make a daughter pay for the father's debt. We feel that that's a injustice. So that it's just a difference between the two cultures. I think it's a culture clash. So you got to be able to bring that out in the debate that the cultures are totally different. And we don't want to get into the habit of suggesting that our culture that's what you call xenophobic, right? Base ass, sax ass, and a foul back, right? When she said that about Trump supporters, she was really talking about herself or
Well,
people
it's
who
also
say
it's
that
also
about the Bible.
presentism. There's also
Exactly.
presentism.
Yeah.
They didn't have the economic structures that we have here. It was
Right.
a new
Right.
nation starting out.
Yeah, we have a more sophisticated system here where we can do things that aren't as direct and in your face. You know,
Right.
to us, it's to them, it was like, look, you owe me money. You're going to work here. I'm going to watch you
Right.
while you pick this cotton. I'm going to watch you while you bale this hay. And it was more direct and in your face. Today, somebody owes you money. You go to a creditor. They call them up. They locate them, and they find them. They contact the sheriff's department, and that next thing you know, that person, you're getting $100 a week from that person's paycheck. You don't even know where they worked at. You didn't even know they had a job. So it's a more sophisticated system that we have now to collect debt, but the concept is still the same. To the borrower is slave to the lender, as the scripture teaches. Period. That's
Right.
how it will always be until Christ returns, and then there won't be any debt. Then your debt will be canceled. So the Democrats are not going to cancel your debt. Okay, liberal. Only God will be canceling debt when He returns. All right. So there's no need to vote for the Democrats. They're lying to you. They're not going to cancel your debt. You're still going to owe Citibank. You're still going to owe your student loans.
Gas
Bernie
prices are still going to go up.
Bernie has been bought off again. They purchased another home for him, his fourth home that they bought for him to leave the Democratic Party so that they can put in their statue. Bernie Bernie has been paid off again. So Bernie's not going to help you. You must pay back your debt. You must pay it back. It's a shame for a man to borrow money and not pay it back. I think the Proverbs teaches.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. I want to just quickly dismantle a claim about beating your slave to an inch. And this is a favorite of the atheists. They love trying to give a caricature of Christianity, or, the biblical God. You can beat anyone you want as long as they live within an inch. So I'm going to destroy that really quick.
Where did they get within the inch? Where did they get
I
that
know.
from?
Matt Dillahunty, actually.
Dillahunty trope.
Yeah, the Dillahunty Dodge. But Exodus 21. 20. Let's take a look at it. So here we go. Already and if. See, we're already into casuistic law here anyway. So whenever people see ifs and if something, that means we're talking about case law. It happens on, it's a law of precedent. It can change, but anyway, let's look at the text. If a man smite his servant or maid with the rod and he die under his hand, he shall surely be punished. I don't see anything here about the master getting away with beating someone. In fact, it says he shall surely be punished. And the word note, see, there's even a note, avenged. It's double in the Hebrew, so it's doubly signifying that this guy surely will die the death or be punished. And here's the next verse. Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he's his money. So here's where we get into legal language. People just assume this means, well, if he got within an inch of his life of being dead, therefore it's okay. But no, this is not what it's talking about, because there's an apparent loophole. And where's that loophole? If you keep going down, burn for a burn, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand. We call this lex talionis. That means that if the death penalty doesn't happen, then lex talionis comes in effect. And here's what it says: if a man even smite the eye of his servant, or even smite it, or the tooth for tooth's sake, he shall be let free. So lex talionis shows here that he'll be let free. But the apparent loophole here is that his aved servant can accuse his master and fraud his master, and accusing to the judges that he was unfairly treated or mistreated, and get out of his contractual obligation. So this 1 to 2 days is a protection for the master, because again, his servant could just make stuff up to get out of it. So the 2 days is to deliberate in the judicial system whether if these claims were unfounded, if they had any substance, if they had 2 or 3 witnesses. You had to have 2 or 3 witnesses, Deuteronomy 17, to convict someone. So no, it's the opposite of what atheists like to portray, and they distort what the biblical text is trying to convey. It's trying to show that there is provisions that were set up beforehand to protect both the Aved and also the master. So maybe people can look at it a little bit differently if you actually understand casuistic law. Casuistic law is a group of texts, not just one lone text. So it's really Exodus 20:20 all the way through Exodus 36. So there's like 15 or 16 different texts with casuistic law there. So no atheists, and this is what I was trying to get to in the debate, was just not enough time. But I think we did a good job, though. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, Dr. Josh was doing a lot of gish galloping there, letting us know how much he knows about a Harubu slave. Who the heck cares? If the Harubu's there voluntarily, I don't care about the stipulations or the details. That's their culture. If someone comes and says, I want to work, and they say, okay, these are the rules, and they sign and say, okay, that's fine with me, I'm hungry, then so be it. I'm in no position to judge that culture. All right, that would be xenophobic. Exodus 23. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So if a stranger dwells within your land, you must not mistreat him. You shall not mistreat him. Leviticus 19. So we should read, we should not read that outsiders were somehow, treated differently. When it says in Leviticus 19, you shall not rule over one another with rigor, that somehow is permission to rule over non-Israelites with rigor. As unfortunate as it may seem, even in America today, people tend to be kinder to strangers than their own family. So perhaps that injunction may have been to avoid that type of treatment. For some reason, that seems to be the case. My mother especially, I love her, God bless her heart, but she seemed to treat strangers better than she treated me. It's sometimes. It's like family, you just treat like trash. When a stranger comes, hey, how you doing? Not that my mother treated me like trash. She disciplined me, but I didn't like it. So, but we seem to treat, strangers with respect. And then when it comes to the people we are familiar with, we treat them with disrespect. So perhaps that's in there, that injunction is in there to avoid that. It certainly is not saying that you could treat foreigners with rigor.
No. Well, Exodus 22, I mean, there's like 15 different texts that says to not oppress a foreigner. So Josh just sweeps them under the carpet and dismisses them because he thinks they're tropes. But no, see, not only does it say to love the foreigner, but it says to not oppress them. So no, that's not going to work. Sorry, Dr. Josh, failure.
Yeah, remember he brought up that if you try to harmonize the Bible, this will work. Well, we're Christians. We're going to harmonize the scripture in every single instance. We're not going to read it and try to, disharmonize it or bring disharmony to the text. So yeah, we're going to read Leviticus 19 and contextualize it with Exodus 23. I mean, that's if it's written by one God or inspired by one God, one being, then it's supposed to be harmonized. You couldn't read it any other way. So, but that just points to the fundamental difference between how a Christian reads the Bible and how an atheist might read the Bible. I think that sort of came out tonight.
They fantasy that in the text. But what's up, CJ? Good to have you, man.
Yeah, shalom.
Shalom.
DJ, what's going on?
How's it going?
Just chilling out, man. Talking about the debate where different points that were made. We're just going over. I'd like to hear your feedback on that as well.
Shalom, CJ. Good to see you.
Shalom, Gavin, and good to see you as well. So I take a different view, I guess, than the not just the two of you, but I guess the majority of apologists. I kind of think that the way that Christians typically argue this particular topic is it's almost a loss by default. And I think that the argument should be, is biblical slavery ethical, not is it condoned or does it exist? Because it's obvious that it's condoned, and it's also obvious that it exists. I would just ask people a very simple question. Did the translators know what they were doing? Yes or no? Well, they translated it as the word slave. So, I mean, that should really end the argument as far as whether or not it exists.
I disagree with that. The word aved comes from the word avod, and the word avod 99. It's used 2,900 times. With has to do with involuntary servitude or voluntary servitude and labor. There's like it's like maybe 5 to 10 out of 2,000 that it uses in a negative sense. So I disagree with that.
Well, so do you think that, to just put it pointed, do you think that the translators of every single English Bible in existence got it wrong?
Well, CJ, let me answer that. CJ, when you read the New Testament and where Paul says that, or the I can't remember which epistle, but it might have even been Luke. Might have been Luke or Acts. It might have been Acts. One of the epistles, yeah, it probably was Acts. Says that Paul sailed in a compass. Okay, that's still in your King James. That's still in most even dynamic translations. That word compass simply means a circular course. We no longer use that term today. Would that not have to be fleshed out of the text in order to understand it? That's why we have Greek and Hebrew lexicons. Why not the same for the word slave?
Well, so there's a couple things, honestly. I think number one, if you're gonna say, well, what the slave system in the Bible is different than what you are probably associating with slavery, which is probably the transatlantic slave trade, almost definitely in the case of most Americans. I would agree with that completely. I think the biblical slavery system is absolutely an ethical system that is set apart from systems you see not only in transatlantic, but also in Greece and in Rome and in Egypt, right? And that's the way that I argue with these people when it comes to this particular topic. But if the argument is then that, that the word slave didn't actually mean what it does today as far as a person who is owned as the possession of another, that's just simply not true. Right, that's always been the definition of the word slave.
Define slave. That's not the definition.
Hold on.
That's actually the dictionary definition. That is so. I'm sorry, I have to challenge you on that.
Well,
that's literally the dictionary.
That's fine, but like, would you say that baseball teams buy and sell and trade people?
The sports analogy.
Well, to be fair, Sam, I do think actually,
CJ,
that if we were being consistent. Contracts in the form of like what we see with musicians and what we see with sports players and stuff like that, they are certainly a soft slavery. Absolutely. We don't use that word anymore because we don't like it. But I think that's absolutely, I mean, just to give a perfect example of that, Colin Kaepernick got fined a couple grand for having the audacity to wear Beats by Dre headphones because his masters and overlords who he signed his rights over to said he has to wear Bose. That happened.
Well, he never. Wait a minute. He never. Wait a minute. May I interject here?
Yeah, I just wanted the citation for that.
Well, CJ? I would like to say that under states' rights, under the nation, did he sign away his rights?
I mean, in a sense, obviously I was being a little bit rhetorical there, but with some, yes. Like, for example, I mean, nobody's going to fine me a couple grand for what brand of headphones I wear, right? Like that, but that happens to Colin Kaepernick over a pair of, and that was like back in like 2013 or 14.
Yeah, and I get that if it's under the contract that if he's kind of being trademarked as an image, and he's going to wear a certain thing, depending on how the contract is written out, maybe that could be a violation of his contract. But at what point are his constitutional rights gotten rid of?
Well, that's not answering. That's going off on a whole nother subject. That's not answering the question. I mean, the thing is though, like if somebody is under a ball player analogy we'll use, if they are under a contract and they're still owed a bunch of money, another team can pay that debt off. So for example, if I hire somebody to do a job and I pay them up front, and they still owe me money, but the job is finished, perhaps there's another guy that I could say, hey, look, this guy still owes me a bunch of money, but you give me that money, and he'll come and work for you to work off the debt.
May I give a different analogy here, because you guys seem to be going off these guys.
Respond. I think first you should respond to my analogy, and then you can give a different.
No, analogy. I don't think your analogy actually holds, because there's nothing saying that the ball players are inherently in debt. They're signing a contract to make money playing for a particular team.
No, well, okay. So you're going to play semantics. So let me give you another analogy that I use.
That's not semantics. That's a situational issue, not semantics.
Hey, Jay.
What is wrong with you?
Jay, let me talk. Don't talk over me. We're just going to have a shouting match. Okay, so let me give you another analogy.
I just interjected. That's all.
Okay. Let me give you another analogy that you missed while you were gone. I had a guy that was working for me, and his truck blew up. He asked if he could borrow a few $1,000s and work off the debt. So was I an evil slave owner or was I helping him feed his family? Because he would have been doomed. He didn't have a vehicle. He didn't have credit. He couldn't buy another vehicle. He didn't have the money. He didn't have the credit. He couldn't get financed. He would have been screwed, and his family would have suffered and everything. So at that point, a tragedy struck, and he basically did the exact same thing. He sold himself over to me.
So is that
right? Did you keep him for 6 years?
If he wanted to be kept for 6 years, he would have. Is that person?
If there was right.
No.
What does that matter?
What
does that matter?
Exactly. No, I'm just wondering. Hold on.
And Jay, you didn't answer my question. I asked if I was doing right or doing wrong.
I was trying to, and Jill's interrupting.
Jill, you need to go. Jill, hold on, real quick. Jill, go click on your mic icon and turn your mic up in StreamYard. Yeah, there you go.
Is that person a slave, Jay?
Is that person? No. In the definition that he just gave, no.
So biblical slavery doesn't exist, because that would have been the scenario that would have been regulated, that would have been allowed in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So that's why I say biblical slavery does not exist.
May I respond? May I respond to what he said?
Sure.
Or are you just gonna give me? You know what? I'm done.
Jay, make your response, man. Don't go on a long diatribe.
Okay.
Make your response.
So at what point in the slavery issue, we're talking about a Hebrew slave, a fellow citizen, going into slavery, is it a 1-to-1 comparison to value of a certain thing?
It's a deal. It's a contract. So we can use another analogy. It's let's say the man's crops died for the whole year, and now he needs a year's wage. Can he not do that? I mean, would you not enter a contract to feed your family?
Does he have anything else that he can sell?
Well, if he did, he would, right?
It's his decision to sell whatever he wants to sell.
Wait,
yeah, he can do what he wants.
He can sell whatever
what if he doesn't want to sell everything he's worked hard for? What if he would rather just go work for somebody for a couple of years?
Well, hold on. Is Jill going to continue answering for me, or can I answer for myself? Okay, yeah. I'm actually, you know what? I'm not going to sit in here with Jill, because Jill just wants to actually answer for me.
No, don't run, Jay. Don't run.
Don't run away.
Don't run, dude.
Jill, you gotta...
Yeah, let him.
But you're in the debate too. You overtalked a lot.
He can go. He can sleep.
No, what's your? I'm at work, Jill.
Yeah, I know.
I didn't get an answer though, Jay.
How do you know that I'm at work, Joe?
Well, you did actually say that earlier.
You said you were
Oh,
at
okay,
work,
okay. I was just wondering. I was wondering if he actually knew that or if he was just guessing.
Go ahead,
Thank
Jay.
you.
Go ahead.
Thank you for answering. You guys seem to really like answering.
Jay Patrick,
Go ahead,
Jay Patrick,
Jay.
why don't you answer Sam's questions instead of stalling for time?
Okay. So what I'm wondering is at what point, if I owe...
No, not what you're wondering. What is your answer to Sam's question?
What was the question again? Go ahead.
Was I helping this guy, or was I an evil slave owner for giving him the means to feed his family by allowing him to have a debt that he can work off?
Yeah.
Well, who said anything about slavery being evil?
I'm just asking you. That you still haven't answered. Now
you loaded.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a quick question? Would
Jill wants to answer my questions for me, so I'll just go ahead and go silent.
I'm asking you, would that person be called a slave today? Yes or no? That person that worked
today, if a person is doing a favor for someone, so if like in the circumstance that Sam said,
it's a yes or no question. The scenario you just heard, would the individual working?
I just said no.
Okay.
I was just adding
there's no slavery in the Bible because that was a favor too.
Biblical slavery doesn't exist. There's a definition for slavery, CJ.
You think that? Oh, so you think
so we're clear. So there's the definition for slavery, right? And it's quite literally exactly what I said. Ready for this? The condition of being enslaved. Hang on. I don't know if you have lack comprehension, bud, but it's literally.
Can we stop
exactly
there?
What I said.
Can we stop there and
held or owned?
No, let CJ give his definition.
Or as property. So
can we stop there?
As property is one of the definitions of slavery. The definition of property is a possession. I'm sorry. Hang on. No, we're not going to sit here and look at the definition and then you tell me that I'm quoting it wrong.
CJ, can we stop at one sentence at a time? Can we do it bit by bit?
I literally have made one sentence.
Okay, let's stop there. The condition of being enslaved. What does the word enslaved mean?
It literally has a comma right after that tells you what it means. Held or owned as human chattel or property.
No, commas don't define. It means that's and.
Okay, right? So what is the second half of that definition?
What does the word enslaved mean?
A lot of cringe in here.
And I made this mistake in my graduate studies, and my professor had to correct me. There's a difference between someone being enslaved and someone who is an eved or a slave who is owned by another person. There's a difference.
That can't be true if enslaved is the condition of slavery.
Enslaved is the condition of slavery.
Be made a slave.
Exactly. So you have to be forcing someone to be held or owned. You have to be enslaved. Not just say I want to work. I want to be owned. Or I want to be in bondage. It's totally different.
You just said that slavery.
Look up the definition of enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right. You just said that slavery is the condition of being enslaved, and then you completely forgot the remaining half of this point that's trying to define this. Okay, the definition of enslaved is to be made a slave or the state of slavery. Right. So that's circular. Clearly, that's not going to give us any answers here. What is going to give us answers here is if we actually finish what is right in front of all of our faces right now in plain English. And I'm sorry to be rude about this, but you literally cannot see. It says, and I quote, what everybody can see, held or owned as human chattel or property. Meaning, since that's an or, it's not an and, it's an or, meaning it's either or, right? You can say held as property, and that can be considered a definition for slavery. Property is defined as a possession. So if you are held as a possession, you are a slave.
Okay, so then you need to answer the question that was the scenario that was brought up. Would you call that person who was working, who was held in possession by his own volition? That's the distinction I draw. I don't know what distinctions you're drawing. You're just drawing distinction based on property. Well, so what? You can call me whatever you want to call me. You can call me your boo if you want to. You can call me your property. You can say you own me. Who cares? It's all semantics to me. The question is that person there on their own volition or not? That's
Okay,
the
so that's
difference between. So is that person
Wait,
in
hold
the
on.
scenario? Let me ask the question. In that scenario that was given, is that person? Would you consider that person a slave, CJ?
if so, I guess if
We
I don't
haven't
remember the
defined
exact
terms.
scenario in particular, but let me just say it plainly, right? If you are the property of another person, you are a slave. Not if you are there forcefully. You can be a willing slave. In fact, I would consider myself to be a willing slave of the Lord Jesus Christ.
That's fine, but you think there's a
absolutely
better
willing
word for
slave,
that, CJ? Is there a better word for that we can
I'm
use?
asking. I'm not talking about what the scriptures say. I know we're Christians and we use terminology that is ancient.
Right. I just answered your question, though. If you are the property of another person, you are a slave. That is the definition of slavery. It doesn't have anything to do with being willing. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you were kidnapped. Those are different. Those are forms of slavery for sure. Right. And this is why I say we need to change the way that we argue about this, because frankly, friends, it is dishonest. Right. When we say that biblical slavery doesn't exist, first off, we're telling all of the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of translators in hundreds or thousands, of different languages that they don't know what they're doing, because they're all translating this the same way.
We already dealt with that.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We already dealt with that.
Jill?
I was just
the translators also.
I was just wondering if I could have a one-on-one.
We're talking about people who were translating in the 1900s also, right? Like they're all using the word slave, because we know that the word slave fits here. Because the
They
word
also
slave,
use the word
again,
compass. They also use the word compass to describe a circular course. Does that mean we're going to use the word compass? That means we're going to use that word?
Yeah, use that.
Can I
Use
make
that
a
on
point?
Tiger sometime when you're debating flat Earth.
Bondservant is not
Yeah,
strictly
go ahead,
servant.
Bob. Hold on, I'm gonna let Bob make a point. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, so Jill, you were stating you were pointing to being enslaved as the definition of slavery. We then go to the definition of enslaved in the same source, and it says to reduce to or as if to slavery. So then we have to go back to slavery. No, hold on, Jill. I'm making a point.
Okay.
We then have to go back to the definition of slavery, because the definition of slavery, irrespective of enslave, is in the definition. Otherwise, it's circular and it means nothing. So, Jill, Praise, can you go back?
Enslaved means to force. That's what the prefix.
No, that's not what the. No,
Yes,
that's not what.
To
No,
make
that's not what the.
To make
Jill,
someone a slave.
wait.
Yes.
Jill, that's not what the definition just said.
Finished.
There's a definition for enslaved.
Yeah, I haven't actually.
Let him finish.
Okay.
So, well, this is different.
To make someone a slave.
Slavery.
Jill, let him finish.
Let me share my screen quickly. Oh my goodness.
No, you can't ever let anybody else make a point. You have
There's
to
the word right there.
He made his point.
I want to hear Argatha. Anybody here want to hear Argatha's point and let him finish it?
Sure, go ahead and make your point, then I'll share my screen after that.
Oh well, thanks for giving him permission, Jill.
Okay, so anyway, we were looking at the term slavery. Praise, can you pull up slavery?
Slavery.
I'm a slave of Christ.
Yeah, that's the example
there you
we can
go.
use
That's
today.
not-
Yeah.
What was the page you were just on where it was the definition that you had up before we looked up
Enslave. Or it was slave. Yeah, so I put slavery, here's slave.
Oh, that's right. You guys did that debate tonight, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
Oh, I plan on watching it after this.
Yeah,
This is
it's
not
not
the same
between.
definition.
T-Jump's not in there, by the way. Just to let you know.
Oh, what happened to him?
He slept through apparently, so it ended up being Praise and Jill versus Surus and Dr. Josh.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
He forgot to set his clock forward. Spring forward, TJ. Spring forward.
but he might just work nights, and that might be a reason.
I think he
who knows?
went out. I think he's afraid.
Dude, I slept all day today too. Actually, I woke up and went right, and like 5 minutes later, went right back to sleep. Slept the rest of the day. I don't know what was wrong with me, but go ahead.
No, they say that there's some studies on daylight savings time screwing with people's sleep cycles. So, but that's another conversation for later. But anyway, go ahead, Argatha, please continue.
Yeah, well, we're now looking at the definition of slave, and it is different than whatever word we were looking at before the word enslave.
Enslaved, dude. Okay, look, I'll put enslave. Okay, here's the other
I
one.
got enslaved right now.
No,
Just
no,
share my screen.
before enslaved. Do you not have a back button on your browser?
Yeah, right there's slave.
Yeah,
weren't
I
looking
think
at
the
this
thing that
word.
you're
The
noticing
definition is
that we're on a
different.
different source. We were on dictionary.com earlier. It appears we're on Merriam-Webster now.
Oh,
I thought it was on Merriam-Webster before. I didn't change. No, it was on Merriam-Webster.
This is
No,
just
you
for
Googled it
dictionary.
and then
I mean,
clicked.
it's fine. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there's a problem, but before it was actually dictionary.com.
Hey,
Well,
guys.
I'm
If
gonna
it
tell
was,
you,
that's my
if we're
fault.
going to
That's
look
my
up the
bad. That was
definitions of
yes.
words, if we're going to look up the definitions of words, we have to stick to one source.
Hey, guys, real quick. Can we just?
Why?
How about this? I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna leave again for the update time because I'm here at work. But would anybody? I might start a live stream later. And CJ, you're welcome to come on. Sam, you're welcome to come on. I know Jill won't join because he's a pansy. But if you guys want to come on and you want to have a discussion about this, what I would like to do is separate what this term is, this slave term, and just focus on the context of the term eved as it's being defined in the scriptures as to what it is and why it is that the scholars, biblical scholars, translated the scriptures in such a way that a lot of the English translations that we have today have deemed that term eved to mean or to be equal to slave as we understand it today. Because I think that's
I've already answered
or servant. So, well,
Yeah.
that's fine. Jill, great. You've made my channel for me.
That
What
was
is
me.
a
I
pansy?
said that, Jay.
What is
What's
a pansy?
Argatha said that just now. That was me.
What's that? I'm sorry.
I
thought-
said that
no,
it
I was
also
going-
can mean servant.
Yes, no, and I don't have any problem with that. I don't have any problem with that. But what I want to talk about is in the context of whether or not we translate it as servant or slave. What is the context in which the term eved, what are these people? What is the distinctions that is being made about these particular individuals that are being addressed in these particular scriptures? You seem to have
the translators are correct. The translators are correct because that word slave was the word that they used to describe both someone who was enslaved and someone who wanted to work. So I have no problem with the translators there. That's an argument that doesn't need to have.
Unless you're using King James. Well, hold on, Jay. Unless you're
Argatha, but no, I just real quick, and then I'll take off. But Jill, you've been challenging non-believers, the atheists per se, on your channel, holding to the idea that slave necessarily means, as it is written, is what you said, is the involuntary servitude of someone who is innocent.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying now that translation is fine.
No, what I'm saying is that for a word-to-word translation, which is what the King James is, it's fine to translate eved into slave, just like it was fine to translate a circular course into compass. It's up to us to actually do the legwork and the homework and to look.
Jill, then you've missed. Can
I explain really quick though why
I have a problem with that?
Go ahead. Okay. Well, that doesn't seem to be your issue, but go ahead, CJ. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, you're perfectly fine. So, and this is why I point out it's all of the translators. It's not just because you're pointing out, the King James Bible and all these other people, right? These are the same words that they use. Okay. Well, what about the English Standard Version, which came out in 2001 and which has sufficient English to describe one group of people as a slave and another group of people as... I know the word eved is the same, but we're not talking about whether or not the word eved is the same. We're talking about the translation into English and what the communicating, obviously, what was trying to be communicated to the Hebrews, to us here in the English, right? And yet in the English Standard Version, they use the word, I'm reading Leviticus 25:44 right now from the ESV, as for your male and female slaves. And of course, whom you may buy male and female slaves from, blah, 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 right? That's not the point. The point is they use the word slave, right?
A slave to them, CJ, could have meant a voluntary servant, and it could have been an involuntary service. So the fact that the translators kept that word and did not change it into a modern understanding based on the context, which would define that word, I don't have a problem with that. They didn't do that with several words. They kept the word-to-word translation instead of a more dynamic
Well,
translation.
in this particular case, the ESV, for example, when it usually has compasseth, right? I guess I don't know which verse in particular you guys were saying, but like, for example, when you're talking about the rivers that encompass the whole land of Havilah, right? It doesn't use the word compasseth in the ESV. It uses that goes through, or that goes through the entire, or something along those lines, right? So it does actually alter the language to make it still communicating the same thing, of course, but in modern, as we would call it, quote unquote, English. And
in some cases, not all. And slave is one of those cases where they don't. And again, I don't have a problem with it. That's why we have lexicons out the nose.
Okay, so we've seen the definition of slavery here, right? It doesn't imply forced, right? We've actually seen it now from two different sources.
No, enslaved means that you're making someone a slave. That's what it says.
Right, but again, we need so first off, make does not necessarily imply. For example, I can make somebody a knight or make somebody my starting quarterback. That doesn't imply any level of force, right?
All right. Well, how about this definition? Let me show you this one. This is the one I read in the debate, by the way. This is Webster's Revised Unabridged Dictionary, where it gets a little bit more succinct or clear as to what a slave is to us today. It's someone who is forced, who is there against their will. You cannot find me a slave or someone who's there voluntarily and suggest that person would be called a slave today. That's just ridiculous to me.
Right, I agree with that. I think the word slavery is changed. It has a much different connotation now than it did back then.
Well, see, there's an interesting way that the dictionaries we've been looking at refutes that, right? Because now we've seen both dictionary.com and Merriam-Webster. They said that the definition of a slave was either one who was property of another person, that was dictionary.com, or chattel of another person, which is an archaic way of saying a possession, right? Both property and chattel mean possession. So both of them agree it's somebody who is a possession of someone. Now, the reason that's important, right, that both of them agree is because dictionaries are not actually, as you guys all well know, prescriptive. They're descriptive. And if they're agreeing on something, they agree on it because they are seeing the majority of English speakers use it in that way when they're using it in its proper context. So the fact that we're finding not only one dictionary, but multiple dictionaries that agree that what defines what makes you a slave is not actually whether or not you were forced to be there, but whether or not you were considered to be the property of another person, that indicates that even today we're still using the word slave for the most part as somebody who is the property of another person. Now, and this is why I say that we need to change the language we use. It's not that I'm saying that what happened in the Bible is akin to what happened in Rome or in Egypt to the Hebrews or in the modern transatlantic slave trade, right? That's certainly not the case. There's a reason they had a slave Bible and edited out all the parts that told you about how you need to treat your slaves, right? But let's be clear, it was how you need to treat your slaves. It wasn't how you need to treat somebody, like your pals or your buddies or your workers or your pets.
They
or something
could have
like
been.
that, right?
And that's where I think you're trying to be on both sides of the fence when you're saying that. See, because there's more context to it. So a slave like a modern day American slave, that's totally different than what was taking place in the biblical times. I don't think that word. It's just like the word love, right? The word love, the American word love is, if we interpret the word love, what does that mean? Like, did you love her for the night? Do you love her like your wife? Do you love your dog? Do you love your child? Do you love the woman that you just met? Do you love her do you love your bro? Do you love your family? Do you see how I can use that word and according to the dictionary, yeah, it would be fitting in all those scenarios, but there's a delineation I think that needs to take place. And that's why I asked that analogy of when I helped my friend out, I let him borrow a bunch of money. Now let's say he worked half of that debt and then didn't want to work the rest. If you're going to call me a slave owner, then why would I help him at all? That wouldn't accurately represent the scenario that took place. But in a biblical context, it would. Let's say that maybe somebody needs to feed their family. They have a bunch of debt, and I say, okay, hey, look, I have a piece of property. I'll move you out there. I want you to build me all of these fences and barbed wire, cut down my trees, and I'll pay off all your debt. But you need to work for me for that year. By biblical definition, by what you're trying to argue, that would make me a slave owner. But in reality, that would not be an accurate word to represent what was actually taking place.
See,
So when you try to say that, oh yeah, it's the same type of slavery, or
No, I
that's the
didn't say
right
that. Hang
word
on.
or the right interpretation, I disagree with that because it does not accurately describe what was taking place.
Hang on, though. So there's a couple things. First off, I explicitly did say the opposite. I want to be clear here. I have explicitly said that what happened in the Bible was not the same as far as their system as what happened in Egypt, what happened in Rome, what happened in the transatlantic slave trade, right? So I just want to make that perfectly clear, right? I'm not saying that they are the exact same thing.
Yeah, so when you use the word slavery,
hang on.
like there's an equivocation fallacy taking place.
No, that's not good argumentation at all. So let me give you a perfect example, right? So I can say both a baseball player and a football player are an athlete. That is accurate. It does not mean I'm saying that they're exactly the same. I can make that even more specific and say both a quarterback and a running back are football players, but that does not mean that they're exactly the same. And I can make that even more specific and say both a running back in the Canadian League and in the American League are running backs, but still that does not mean that they're exactly the same, right? So the saying that the false equivocation is just simply not true. The categories can have subcategories within them, right?
Sure it is. No, I disagree. I think it is a false equivocation because when you say the word slave to anyone out on the street, I didn't interrupt you. When you say the word slave to anyone out on the street, what are they going to think? Now, don't be disingenuous. Just answer the question. If you just walk out into the street and say, hey, what is a slave? What are they going to tell you?
Most people in America will certainly associate it with the transatlantic slave trade first.
Right. So then when I say it's an equivocation fallacy, that is accurate.
No, because I've already stated. No, I've already stated perfectly clearly multiple times now.
You have
it's not the same thing.
You have, but when Jill's debating a room full of atheists are listening, then they're not going to be hearing that.
What's a running back? Most people are going to tell me. And if they're really, in fact, I could even ask somebody who knows football really well, what is a running back? And they can explain to me in depth all the different things that a running back does. And I guarantee you, they will explain me a running back by the American rules of football, not by the Canadian rules. Why? Because they're American and they are obviously within that context.
CJ,
that does not mean that the Canadian running back is not a running back.
CJ,
can I clarify something?
You're missing the point.
Can I clarify something?
Yeah, hold on 1 second. So the point that I would make is that when you're going,
seeming disagreement is.
Argartha, hold on. When you go into a debate and you're debating and there's a room full of atheists there, they're not going to listen to you explain that. So they are going to falsely equivocate that word. They don't care. So I fully agree with the way that Jill made his argument. I think that it's accurate. I think that it's a better representation than just going into a room where a bunch of people aren't going to listen to you and they're going to falsely equivocate. I mean, did you even pay attention to the chat during that debate? It was just bull crap. Everyone in there is so full of crap. They're not going to listen. As soon as you say the word slave, they're like, slavery, and they're all trying to put this like antebellum spin on it. And it's not that word. I have a problem with that word now. It does not accurately represent what was taking place. Period. It just doesn't.
So, hang on though. There's a couple things. So first off, you've completely ignored.
Can I make a point? Can I clarify something? You guys are both arguing. Okay, look. CJ is not committing the equivocation fallacy. What Redefined Living is saying is that when you say slavery, everybody else commits the equivocation fallacy.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay,
that's my point. So there's no delineation when you use that word.
That's not our problem, though, and that's why I say.
Yes, it is our problem.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
Yes, it is our problem. It absolutely 100% is our problem.
Let me explain.
Sam, let him make his point. I disagree too.
When I say that the Bible says homosexuality is a sin, everybody equivocates that to hatred for homosexuals. Irrelevant, though, because homosexuality is still a sin. Period. End of the conversation, right? When I say that the
That's
Bible
not the
commands
same.
patriarchy in a relationship, people say that's sexism and keeping women down. False equivocation does not matter because that's what the scripture teaches.
No, that's
right?
not the
So on and
same.
so forth. No, that is exactly what you're saying.
No,
right?
it's not. It's not the
because of
same.
what these people are saying, because of what they equivocate these terms to, I have to start changing my language. But that's not how anything else would operate. And frankly, I have already made perfectly clear, right, where I stand as far as the differentiation, as far as one system versus the other, right? If you're not going to deal with that, regardless of if you're theist or atheist or what have you, that's just you not being honest. And frankly, anybody with ears to hear is going to come at this situation honestly. They're going to look at it honestly, and they're going to understand, okay,
So
yes, this is slavery. It is people being owned as property for sure. But
no,
That's
there's
not
a
slavery.
difference.
no, it's not.
Only
It's
if they're
CJ.
not securely
CJ
generated
was
by it.
homosexuality different 2,000 years ago than it is today?
No.
Okay, so that's why it's not. That's why I say that's not a good analogy.
Okay, but neither
Because
was
it's the
slavery.
same. It's coming
Slavery
against
was
the same
different
thing.
2,000
But
years
you,
ago
but
than
but
today.
I think
People
if
might
we can
understand
get
it differently, but that doesn't mean that it itself is different.
I think if we can get an answer to the question is to whether or not you would call that person that worked for is that redefined living?
yeah, the person that did that make me a slave owner? Was I a slave owner?
Hold on, no, not you, because the people are still called owners today. Would that person be called a slave today? The answer is no. The slave has to be entirely subjected, meaning he does not have any will of his own, but he is subjected to the will of another. That's the Webster's Revised Unabridged Dictionary definition. So it's characterized, the word today is characterized by a lack of freedom of action or will, meaning you cannot leave when you say you want to leave. So the distinction that needs to be drawn is voluntary versus involuntary. If you're not drawing that distinction up front, then you're not dealing with the question or the definition of the word.
And that's a question that deals with the internal ethics, though. That's a completely different question than does the Bible condone slavery, or does the Bible endorse slavery, or does the Bible contain slavery? Does biblical slavery exist? Any of those things, right? The question you're now asking, Jill, which I agree with, by the way, and I would love if Christians would start asking this question.
I saw your
basically,
video.
is biblical slavery ethical? And that is the key question. Because
So
of course it
why call
is.
it slavery?
It absolutely is ethical, right? And it is on us as the people who are actually making that claim to explain that. It's very easy for us to do. A lot of people already do it. But when you're coming at this from the perspective saying, no, it doesn't even exist, that's dishonest.
No,
right? That is, and I'm not saying you're meaning to be dishonest, but I am saying it is dishonest.
Okay,
It's
so
not dishonest.
if biblical slavery is ethical, why call it slavery?
Right.
I would say it's
you're just redefining the word slavery to fit your position, and at the same time as you're calling us, you're doing the same thing though. You're drawing a delineation.
Who is
You're doing the same
Why
thing.
call it slavery if it's ethical?
Huh? CJ is. He's saying, "Oh, it's an ethical type
I'm
of
literally
slavery."
the only person in this conversation who is sticking to the dictionary definition of slavery.
No, you're not.
The
Not
only
this
person.
Not this.
Yeah, that's not accurate either.
That is 100% accurate.
Not this.
No, it's not.
CJ, do you see?
Look at the definition right in front of you.
This is
look
a
at the
definition.
screen.
I think that's a more detailed than just a few words or just read.
All right, so hang on. This is hilarious, actually. You realize we've now been through, this is the fourth definition. Three of them agreed with me, and now you're saying, well, look at this one. This one disagrees with you, CJ. You're not being honest with the definition. Like, come on, guys. Are we atheists here? Or are we arguing like theists?
Okay, so fine. CJ, we'll just use this definition then from here on out. How's that?
First of all, they did not agree with you because to be enslaved means to be forced into servitude.
No, it is not. To be enslaved is to be made a slave.
Just showed the definition.
I can make you a knight. I can make my starting quarterback somebody else. That does not mean I'm forcing them, number one. And number two, okay, the definition said to be the property of, I'm not going to let you run away from that, okay?
Yes,
I'm sorry. It is dishonesty.
You make
it's not dishonesty.
Yes, it is. The definition said in plain English, the property.
Okay, CJ, hold on, Jill, please let me tackle this. Jill, please, let me tackle this. So CJ, okay, so let's use your logic and let's use your accusation of dishonesty, right? So you're trying to redefine the word slavery to say that somehow it's ethical. So show me a definition of slavery that's ethical, CJ. Show me. Show me ethical slavery, CJ. You're being dishonest.
I literally am showing you an ethical.
No, you're dishonest, CJ. You are a dishonest Christian because slavery is not ethical.
Goodness, dude,
there you go.
Like literally.
Show me ethical slavery. Show me ethical definition of slavery, CJ. You're dishonest.
The definition of slavery.
See, you're doing the same thing, dude. You don't even see it.
Can I share my screen, Praise, please?
Show me ethical slavery in the dictionary, CJ.
Slavery. What is this? That
Gavin, push it in there, buddy.
Show me ethical slavery, please.
Can I make a point?
CJ's doing the same thing, and then he's calling us dishonest, and that's not right.
Go ahead, Bob.
I don't think dishonest is the right word. I think it's disingenuous.
It's not disingenuous. He's doing the same thing. He's saying somehow slavery is ethical. Show me ethical slavery, CJ. It's a bad word, dude. The word doesn't work.
There's ethical slavery.
Show me the definition of slavery that's ethical, please.
The definition of slavery, we have already.
No. Show me it on paper. Find it on dictionary.com or whatever.
He's not going to keep talking over you, CJ.
Well, I'm a little confused. When you say slavery is ethical, are you saying that it's permissible by God, or that there's actually a positively moral aspect to slavery? Or what does that mean? Slavery is ethical.
He's saying it's better than.
That's a good question.
In the case of the Bible, so there's a couple things. Number one, it's ethically permissible. That would be the first thing I mean.
I think he was asking me.
No. Anybody. It was for everybody.
Either way, you can go, Argoff. That's fine.
Well, I want to make a point first. Is my point is the Bible translates the word as slave, so we have to deal with that.
No, Bob. Let me ask you a question. Okay, like 30 years ago, what did the word "gay" mean?
It meant happy.
Okay, so you have to say, so Bob, you're gay. Okay, from here on out, you're gay, Bob. Are you okay with that? Do you see the problem with what you're saying? It doesn't work, Bob. That's you didn't think about that.
That's why we
okay. If you're going to be gay, Bob, from here on out, then we'll go with your logic. If not, then you need to stop.
Hermeneutics 101. Context. That defines the word, not your lexicon, not your Google.com search.
Damn.
The context defines the word, not your dictionary.
No offense, Bob. I'm not Bob, don't take offense to that. I was just trying to make a point.
I know. I understand.
You're a good guy, dude. So
I'm an intelligent person. Bob thinks I'm not an ideologue. Okay. So
no. He's gay.
I hope I didn't offend you.
That goal. Okay.
I'm just kidding.
I get your point. What I'm saying is that the scholar, do you have a new translation of the Bible, a recent translation of the Bible, dismissing, the fact that they use the Alexandrian and Egyptian text? Is there a new version of the Bible that does not translate any of the instances of Eved as slave?
That's not the point that I'm making. So my point
I understand your point.
I'm asking for CJ to do the same thing you're asking me to do. You're asking me to show you a definition, which Jill already did. I'm still waiting for CJ to provide an ethical definition of slavery. He's not able to do that.
So can I do that then? Because first off, the word slavery is obviously not going to say this is ethical or this is unethical within the.
Then it's not accurate, and you just lost.
Dude. Will you just shut up and let me say something?
Okay. No. You need to provide the you. You can't have a double standard.
Hang on. I know that you are embarrassed at this utter spanking that you're getting.
I'm not.
You need to shut up and allow me to give you this spanking. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
For God has foreordained before the foundation of the world that I came here to give you this spanking. Okay. So
when CJ is done,
whether you like it or not, my friend.
When CJ
is
done, I'd like to share my screen.
Slavery is not going to say in the definition this is ethical or this is unethical.
Jill, he's using our argument now, so pay attention.
However, okay. If we go look at the definition of slave, so I have looked up slave here in the Microsoft Bing. I guess it's not Google, The first thing that comes up is Oxford dictionaries. It says, a person who is the legal property of another and is forced to obey them. Notice again, it is the legal property of another. Let's see, hang on, but that's only one.
That's not ethical.
Merriam-Webster. Merriam-Webster says a person in servitude as the chattel of another.
That's not ethical.
Possession. So that's two different definitions that say if you are in the property of another person, then you are considered to be a slave. Dictionary.com, a person is the property of and wholly subject to another and forced to provide them unpaid labor. This one at least does add one caveat, which is that there is unpaid labor. But again, what makes them a slave? It is the fact that they are property. What about Cambridge? Are we going to go 4 for 4?
Context defines the word.
Person who is legally owned by someone else and has to work for that person. Number 5, what about the Free Dictionary? One who is owned as the property of someone else, especially meaning not in totality, meaning not completely. In involuntary servitude. You know what that means? It means that people.
What's interesting?
Did I miss the ethical part?
Hang on.
Did I miss the ethical part?
You think of it as involuntary
Shut up and let him finish his thing.
However, okay, I'm going to continue talking, whether you like it or not.
Go ahead, keep
It
going.
is not entirely just involuntary servitude. It can also include voluntary servitude. But again, we've now looked at 5 different ones. The first 5 that came up. Cambridge again comes up. The activity of legally owning another person who's forced to work for you. What is the thing that makes you a slave? It is owning another person. Does the Bible say that these people are owned? Yes or no?
Okay, that's false. That is false.
Yes.
I think it's almost assumed that the people in those definitions, those modern day definitions, the word is just taboo. It only means one thing. It only means someone who's forced into those situations. I think that is so much a given that there's no reason to even say. There's no reason to even. Hold on, let me finish. There's no reason to even say that person was forced to be there, even though we do have some definitions that do say they must be forced in order to be considered enslaved. That's what the word enslaved means. But here, someone asks for translations that don't use slaves, and I found that for you. I don't know if you're familiar with BibleHub.com. But this is Leviticus 25, one of the atheists' favorite tropes. You may buy your female slave.
Oh, they love them some Leviticus 25. They
go
sure
down to the Berean Study Bible. It says your man servants and your maid servants. So yes, we do have Bible translations that do make that dynamic change from slave, which is a word we do not use today to describe people who are there voluntarily, who come from other nations around you. So why are we using this word in debates with atheists? We need to do the legwork when it comes to the hermeneutics of the term and read this context, which is going to define what the term means. I don't care if they called them whatchamacallits. It doesn't matter the label that was given to them. The question is, in what capacity did they serve? Were they there voluntarily, or were they enslaved? Were they forced to be there? That's a distinction you have to draw, even though every definition is not going to make that distinction, because I think it's assumed that if someone is working for someone else and a property of someone else, that they're there involuntarily in our society today. But that wasn't the case back then. But in our society today, if you're owned by someone else, it's assumed then that you're not there voluntarily. I think that's safe to say. So I don't know if looking up definitions would help us from dictionary.com.
Well, I just want to point out that none of the 5 definitions that CJ showed had anything to do with this moral type of slavery. So I don't know how showing me those 5 definitions, how you think those supported you in any way.
How did they
this goes back to my original point. What did the translators translate the word as? What dictionary did they use to pick that word?
They use different translations. I just showed you 3 or 4: bondsmaid, servant. Some use slave.
Well,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
He's asking though what incited them to use the words that they did though.
We don't really know. I mean, there's direct translations, there's word for word translations.
Yeah. There's interpretations and there's some translations. So there's interpretations and translations.
There's different means of attaining. We don't need to read into that anything more than that. We need to look at the context that surrounds the word. That's how you're going to define it as far as the capacity of the servant. I'm not going to define it based on my understanding of the word, even their, especially my understanding of the word today, or even their understanding, but the context, because they used that word, that same word, eved, to describe several different capacities. So I have to do my homework, even if the translators messed up. Let's say the translators messed up on the word slave in a few occasions. Obviously, they didn't in other occasions, like the Berean Study Bible. Just like they messed up on the word compass. What the heck is a compass? How do I sail a compass? I live in the 21st century. I'm reading a book that's
not a
telling me
mess
that
up.
Paul
That's the
sailed in
King
a
James
compass.
version. You're
It is.
trying to say that the King James version used words that meant something back then, and because they don't mean that now, that means that the translation is wrong.
Wait, hold on, Bob.
No, I'm not saying the translation is wrong. I'm saying that we need to do our homework, because we know that these things happen when you translate from the receptor to the language that we have now.
Bob, I can't understand what you're saying, because when you speak, you have to say thee, they, thy from now on. To be consistent. Huh? To be consistent.
I mean, the translators did their job. I'm not beating up on the translators saying they're horrible. They did a horrible job here. It's not an easy task to try translating something into another language. Try translating one sentence into Spanish and see, and then show that to someone who speaks the native language, and they'll probably laugh at you.
It does seem like you're suggesting.
I understand, Jill.
I agree. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I understand, Jill. I agree. And that's why, look, I get that context is important. I think that there is, I don't think that we can dismiss what a word means. We should look at what the word means and the context. I think both are important.
Nobody wants to accept it. CJ defined it probably the best way it could be when he looked it up. It means you're a possession or property of another person. That seems to be the core of the meaning. I mean, and so
if the Bible said that slavery is being owned in the literal sense by another person,
yeah, the question is can that be?
We believe the Bible, right?
It also says that someone is an eved if they're owned by another person against their will. So that's not, it doesn't move the proverbial ball forward.
Yeah, see, also, though, notice the operative word there is also, not just either or, right?
Right. Today, we don't use that term for someone who is owned voluntarily. We don't use that term to describe them today. You cannot find me a slave who is owned voluntarily. It just wouldn't be nonsensical to even suggest that was the case. I don't know what the argument is.
You have to argue. You can argue it two ways. Accepting that definition that you just described, like how we use it today, and suggesting that it's like against their will. But obviously the biblical definition is just being owned, period. Because I think it says, like when you put an all in their ear, doesn't it actually use that language that they become like their property? Maybe I could be wrong there, but
yeah, pretty
much. That's willful, though. That's not against their will.
Well, that's fine, because that fits the definition. It doesn't matter if it's against their will or not.
It doesn't fit our.
But you guys are arguing that things don't change, definitions don't change, and that's why I wrongly used Bob as an example. But when I said,
right,
gay,
I don't think,
right? But the word "gay" is accurate. So you guys are arguing that because "gay" meant happy at one time, then from here on out we're never going to change the definition of that word. And from now on, we're bound by that forever, even though it's totally lost in context. I don't think that's accurate.
I get
that's
that.
why it's right.
That if the word
that's Sam, that's why I said that's why I allowed for newer translations. Do newer translations not translate the word as slave?
I just showed you that.
I would hope that if we found, let's say, a scripture that said gay is the person who loves the Lord, I would hope and pray that we would not take that understanding of the word gay and read that into, because we found a definition on. No, we want to read the context to determine what they meant by gay.
Right, and if we were to be having that conversation with that verse, I mean, would Bob and CJ be arguing, nope, you have to say that, even though that word is totally lost?
Matthew Vines would love
can we just redefine living and Jill? I'm not Okay, I'm not trying to come at this as an abrasive. I know that I've gotten pretty heated in this, and I hope you understand that it is truly out of a passion for the scripture. And
iron sharpens iron, brother. Go ahead.
And they interrupt you all the time.
I don't interrupt him.
You do constantly.
With that said,
I'm the only one here that listens to his channel.
Sorry about that.
That is true. Jill is actually subscribed to my channel. I appreciate that.
The rest of you guys aren't even subscribed. Subscribe to his channel already.
Actually, you know what? I do need to subscribe to your channel, CJ. Leave your link, by the way, CJ, whenever you're ready.
Just interrupted again.
Absolutely.
Subscribing to a channel does not mean necessarily that you don't interrupt.
Okay.
Oh gosh.
So, but anyway, because I do want to make a point here, right? I not only did I show 6 different dictionaries, but they were the first 6 that came up, and they're modern. They're on the internet that I'm looking up right now, right? And what that means is, because again, dictionaries are prescriptive, not descriptive, meaning that this is what these people are finding in English-speaking countries as the way that people are actually using, as far as properly at least, the word slavery, right? And the word slave. They all define it as property the same way the Bible would, owning somebody as property. Now, when you ask the question, is there an ethical form of slavery? What you're then asking is there any point in time where it is ethical to own somebody as property? I would argue, and am prepared to argue, that the answer absolutely is yes. The Bible presents us a situation where they actually set up a system that, though we would certainly refer to it as slavery today, because it certainly would be, it was actually designed to bring people out of poverty. And in fact, when your slave left you, you had to give them a whole bunch of provisions so that they wouldn't fall back into the poverty that forced them to be a slave in the first place, right? And so I'm completely prepared to argue that point, but that's exactly my point, is that when we're saying, no, this slavery doesn't even exist or something like that, right? The Bible calls it slavery, right? We need to be honest with what the text says, and then those who are willing to listen, we explain to them this is a ethical system that is not what you're used to, not what we put African Americans under here in this slave trade, which was absolutely horrifying, one of the worst that's ever been done to any group of people, right? It's not even close to the same. It's the same general thing, just like the same way that somebody who is a running back and a cornerback, like I said, they're both football players, right? But they're not doing the exact same thing. Likewise, both of these people are both slaves. They're both legal property of another person, chattel, their money, whatever you want to say, right? But
so CJ, so CJ, for every definition you said we found 5. I don't agree. I think 2 of those said enslaved or forced, and then 2 did not mention the fact that they were forced. And again, I think that's something that's pretty much doesn't need to be spoken. If someone is owned as property, we would assume in our culture that person is not there voluntarily, which wasn't the case in the ancients. But here is another definition of slave. So now it was 3 or 4 to 2, 2 to 4. What's the count now?
Well, I just listed through 6. I can do it again.
You didn't do 6, dude. Come on. The 2 of those were the ones that I posted, and they did say that person is there involuntarily.
I mean, I can list them again if you want. I just to be clear, like I
can play this game all day. We could play this Google search.
Yeah, CJ, you're not doing anything different than what we're doing. Like, you're trying to bend it one way and we're trying to bend it the other, because all of the examples you get, ironically, didn't support you at all. They clearly you gave, however many examples or definitions of something, and then you're taking that and saying, hey, look, this is clearly against their will, but I want it to mean this. You're doing the exact same thing. You're just bending it a different way. We're saying, hey, we don't like the word, and you're saying, well, hey, I don't like the definition.
Okay, I didn't
there's no difference.
Point in time say that this was forced. Okay, in fact, I've been clear in this conversation. I don't know how I could possibly be clearer.
Right? No, I know, but you're missing what I'm saying, CJ. All the definitions that you gave are the opposite of what you are trying to say.
How? Explain.
Because they all say forced, like they're. Because they all say forced.
No, they don't. A person who is the legal property of another, it is not actually saying that somebody, and this one indeed it does say is forced to obey them at the end portion of there, right? However, I would be perfectly clear, right? Notice it's a person who is a legal property of another at first, and then it is forced to obey them. And in that particular instance, you would be forced to obey them, right? But even then, this still does actually indicate what I'm arguing here. And notice, by the way, just because I know underneath we said
CJ, the conjunction means you need both in order to be a slave.
Notice it says similar bondsman and bondservant, right? But go ahead.
Yeah,
the conjunction means that you need both to be a slave. You need.
And look at the example that they're giving you.
Are you forced to obey your employer, Jill?
Wait, can I ask a question? Are we asserting that there's a? Are we saying that there's a?
When I was in the military, when I was in the military, I was forced to obey my master.
I am the legal property.
I have a question. Are we saying that the term force here, in terms of the words, the definition of slavery, is an inherently moral aspect to it, or?
I don't think the military is immoral.
Basic question: were you forced to obey your employer? The answer, of course, is obviously yes.
No,
right? They have legal ways to actually threaten you. In our modern country, it's by firing.
But you can also be forced depending on your financial situation too, right?
But you're also not using the word slave. You're using the word employer, not slave.
We're not.
Okay, that's not my point. Where I'm talking about the word forced really quick, right? Because my point in saying, are you forced by your employer to obey them?
No,
is that
no.
You're not. So can they not fire you?
I could leave before they fire me. I could leave before they
No. Wait. But wait. What if you're forced? But what if you're using force in another fashion? Like, for example, because of your financial situation, you are forced to do such and such.
No, that's an economic.
You're still there by your will.
Well, that's why I was asking. If are we looking at the word force only in a moral aspect, or are we looking at it more?
We're looking at the word force as another entity. Not your economic reality.
So it doesn't have to be moral then?
We're saying that that's immoral. The Bible does not support that.
I'll say that's not relevant
or legislated at all.
No, wait, hold on a second. But if the word force has no moral aspect to it, then I think it makes perfect sense then for somebody to willfully enslave themselves or to willfully put themselves under the submission of someone else because of their, let's say, for example, their financial situation,
and that
forces
would never
them to be put in that situation.
That's the point. That person would not be fit this definition of slave today.
You guys are off.
To me personally, it doesn't bother me at all.
Is it immoral for a king to force his kingdom to obey him? Yeah, his subjects.
Well, where's the moral arbitration coming from? Is it coming from God or something other than God?
Well, Argotha, I could answer that. It depends. Are you allowed to leave?
If
are you allowed to leave that country?
It's his rules. If you don't like it, leave. Now, if he tries to make you stay, that's slavery.
Unless it's North Korea or communist Russia, where you can't leave.
Stick with the analogy and then move from it. Stick with the analogy and then move from it.
I did.
Are you talking about anymore?
That would be perfectly moral.
You're talking about on an intrinsic level, not just on a more conventional aspect.
That would be Veckel. That would be perfectly moral. It's his country, however he obtained it, the land. Now, if you could demonstrate that he robbed someone to get that land, then I would, we can adjudicate.
Sure.
But if he obtained the land by way of a just way of obtaining the land, maybe someone gave it to him, and he sets the rules for that land, you don't like it, leave.
See, what about? Wait.
You're free to leave. Now, if he says no, you can't leave. You must work. Now,
I agree with that. I agree with that.
We understand that in biblical law that you could run, and that they can't send you back.
I would say the question on the screen would be an example of a correct definition of slavery, because the Israelites were being held against their will. They were not allowed to leave Egypt. So that would be a correct definition of slavery. But when the Israelites move into their own area and they bring people in and they are bound by contractual type agreements, then that is not an accurate. So that's where the equivocation fallacy comes in.
Exodus does actually call
Egypt
Misraim. What is it? Something Ibed. I can't remember exactly what it is. So you'll forgive that. I guess I was going to be trying to be cooler than I actually am. But nonetheless, Egypt is called the house of slavery. right? And the word used there for slavery is ibed, actually. So interesting that you should say that, considering that they actually use the self-same word to describe the Egyptian bondage as they do the bondage that Israelites are allowed to put people under. Which
What
again,
about
my
in
argument is
context,
there's no
though?
rules,
Not in. What about in context?
Does it matter who's the
Look,
slave owner?
I asked a question earlier. The question was the beginning of an argument, okay? And then you guys all jumped in.
Well, we've been arguing the whole time.
Is it moral for a king to force his subjects to obey him?
Oh, I did answer that. If the subjects are allowed to leave the country, then it's debatable, I guess. But if they're not allowed to leave, then it definitely is immoral.
Does it matter?
It's definitely immoral. Okay. Wait.
Well, hold on.
Okay,
Let me answer. Let me respond.
No, wait. Sam gave his answer. Let's address his answer. So, Sam, if you think that's the case, can you show me in Scripture where it says something along those lines?
What?
Sure. The examples of what we're calling slaveries of the Egyptians, that was different. That was more of like a business type arrangement. As compared to how the Egyptians were keeping the Israelites as slaves. So you have the same word representing two different scenarios.
Well, I would dispute that in the fact that the Egyptians were abusing the Israelites.
No, dude. Let my people go. Moses, he's like, hey, let them go. And Pharaoh said no.
You have to read the whole story of the Israelites. They were vassals. They were not always treated with rigor until
I have to interject. Let me interject really quick. So Guru Lady asks, if there's no biblical slavery, then why did Moses send Moses to free the Israelites from the Egyptians? That's something we're talking about. We're talking about if slavery was imposed in the Bible. We're saying that's not the case. We know the Bible records slavery, but it doesn't sanction it. So as long as that's what we're arguing right now.
Yes, it does.
The closest you're going to get to that is in Exodus 21, but that's not something that's prescriptive for us today, I guess.
Okay, so wait. God is a higher authority than Egypt, right?
Yes.
So God told Egypt through Moses to let his people go.
After he began to make them work without pay. Woe to someone who makes their servant work without wages, I think Jeremiah says.
Yep.
Why'd they use the same word? Why'd they use the same word for the slavery?
Because that's the way they spoke. They didn't have 16 different words for work. They only had one.
See, this is the distinction. The distinction.
Whether you were working voluntarily or working because you wanted to pay bed, or working because you wanted to pay restitution for committing a crime, they had one word to describe that.
So you are saying that the Bible shouldn't have used the word slavery, though?
No.
I'm saying we should use today to describe voluntary workers. We should use the word that we use to describe someone who wants to work.
Okay.
It's an employee.
I hear you. So the word, though, that
they didn't have an option.
In Egyptian, you're saying that that was just the only word because it's like a catch-all for what could be called servitude, employment, or slavery.
Right. Butler, maid, yeah.
Well,
doesn't the Bible use that language though? That they were property? Is that because it seems like that's what's kind of in dispute, if it's
in Exodus 21,
they were property.
Exodus 21, it does use that language. Yeah.
Right, they were property.
On top of that, I'd like to point out it does also there is a Hebrew word for a hired worker. It's sakir. It does. In fact, it's in Exodus 21, or excuse me, not Exodus 21. Leviticus 25, when it's talking about how you have to treat your ibed as if they were a sakir. So it's not that they didn't have the right word for it.
That's fine. Because this is why I got a little frustrated in the debate, because we spent so much time arguing on the difference between a Harubu slave. The distinction needs to be made whether or not that person is there voluntarily or not. So that distinction was not made there, even in your example, CJ.
Well, to be fair, so like I have said, I don't think that voluntary is necessarily what makes something a slave or not. But I do think part of the reason why I don't necessarily argue about the voluntary involuntary thing is because I do think that it ends up being a little irrelevant because there is absolutely some involuntary slavery in the Bible as well. For example, I know you don't like to include it, but when they take citizens as prisoners of war, right? Those people are absolutely.
Can I respond to that?
Involuntary. Yeah. Well, hang on. Absolutely. But just real quick, I just want to finish. So that is certainly an involuntary form of slavery. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that is unethical. Again, I would argue that the system the Bible lays out is absolutely ethical.
Amen.
But that is a situation where you have people who are now going to be your slaves, who are under the rules of foreign slaves.
That came up in the debate,
Hebrew, right?
Yeah, that came up in the debate, CJ, and that's why I made a distinction between someone who is a war enemy combatant, someone who owes money. Yes, we do involuntarily make captives of those people and put them away or somewhere. And they may even work for pennies on a dollar making license plates. So they used to until liberals came and decided that it was unethical to make prisoners work.
That's the reason why it should be.
I brought that up, and that's why I always phrase my question to Dr. Josh, which he still won't answer. Except in the case in which we today would sanction the involuntary captivity for prisoners of war, war captives. All of those people, all of those situations will be cases in which they will be involuntarily held captive and may even be forced to work. So yeah, we don't, however, call that slavery today. We call that prisoners of war or someone who's incarcerated. We don't use the word slave to describe these people. So I think it only adds, I think I agree with Redefine. It only confuses the audience when you use words that, like slave, that are taboo.
Well, we do legally use the word slave, right? Think of the. I think it's the 14th Amendment that abolishes slavery, if I'm not mistaken.
The 13th, but not fully, though.
Right, exactly. There you go. Right, that's exactly my point.
But you don't call them slaves today, do you?
That
you call them slaves?
I think it is.
Hang on. Right, legally, we recognize through the 13th. What the 13th Amendment is saying when it says that we're allowed to enslave incarcerated people, right? Is it is legally recognizing, no, we do actually still practice slavery. It's just not the same as what we practiced.
So wait, CJ, would you say now here's where I'm going to spank you. Here's where I'm going to spank you, CJ, where I have been come to spank you. I'm just kidding. But according hold on. According to your logic, CJ, we should be calling them slaves, but we don't. Because that term has been just distorted. So we don't call them slaves anymore. Now according to your logic, we should. So why don't we call them slaves?
Well, so I'd make 3 pithy points. Number one, legally we do, right? The Constitution.
No, we don't. We don't call them slaves.
Yeah, that's true.
No one calls them a slave. They call them prisoners.
You just said.
Well, wards of the state.
They don't call them slaves.
They're there against their will.
Well, nobody calls them slaves.
Hey, let me answer the question that you asked me. Okay.
All right. Sorry.
So go ahead. The legally, as you yourself pointed out, the 13th Amendment does not actually abolish all slavery. So legally, yes, they are actually considered, even in the modern day, slaves. That's why we are allowed to force prisoners to work, right? And that is legally recognized as slavery. It's constitutionally enshrined even as slavery. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I think we absolutely should refer to them as slaves because I think the English language is dying and people need to use words for what they actually mean, because that is absolutely what like a slave, right? I think it's ethical. Again, I think there are versions of slavery that can be ethical, right? And this is another one, but absolutely you should call them a slave. And number 3, I think the reason why lay people may not call them slaves, even though, to be fair, that's actually not 100% true. That's a big portion of the progressive argument is that they are slaves. But assuming progressives and liberals aren't here, right? A big reason why people would not call them slaves, frankly, is political correctness.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Wait, what? What was that last one? What was the last one?
Not political correctness. Is why they don't call people slaves.
So if I would have just used that word, it's not politically correct to use the word slavery when we're talking about the biblical narrative. Then I would win. So It's not politically correct.
I didn't say I agree with political correctness.
Well,
I don't know what you heard, but that's definitely not what I said.
And I know I see what CJ's point. I understand his what he's saying. Some Christians still like to use thou. You know, they use. I hear, you know, you ask them how they're doing, and they start ripping off Old English.
Some
I don't know one person that talks about it. But I'm going to start doing it, though.
They memorize the King James. They start talking like they lived in that era. But geez, I forgot what I was going to say. It'll come back to me.
You were agreeing with CJ.
So while you're thinking, my original question when I asked if it was ethical for a king to force his subjects to obey him, there was a reason that I was asking that question. Now, Sam seemed to think that if they don't have the option to leave the country, that all of a sudden makes it immoral. I would ask for a verse that shows that God approves of somebody like that. Now,
God did
not
approving of something and establishing guidelines to deal with something is different.
My point,
King Saul,
is that a man owning not a king, just a normal man, a businessman or whatever.
You just said if a king.
Hold on, Jill. Jill, shut up and let me make my point.
Wait. No.
Wait. Let me make my point, and I'll shut up as you refute whatever it is that I say.
You're pivoting. I gave you an example. King David. You asked for a king. I gave you a king. Why are you pivoting now to a businessman?
What are you talking about? You don't even understand my point. You don't understand my point. You don't understand my point. You're not listening to me. You never listen to people.
You asked for a biblical example of God saying that you need to obey a king. I gave you two, King Saul and King David.
Well, no, I asked for a biblical example where it was immoral to listen to the king.
Where it's immoral? King David.
Immoral.
It was immoral to listen to the king?
I'm asking because Sam was saying that if they're not allowed to leave, then it is immoral to be forced to obey them.
That's
regarding
correct.
subjugation.
Yeah. If they choose to stay, then it would be immoral to disobey the king because you're deciding to stay in that king's land. So you need to obey the laws of the land. That's what the scripture teaches.
That's right.
Exactly. Sam was saying that if you don't have the option to leave, all of a sudden it's immoral for the king to force his subjects to obey.
It would be because the king is now holding you hostage.
Wait, hold on.
No, guys, you won't even let me finish.
No, I heard your point, Bob. I heard your point.
I asked for scripture. Scripture, not logic, not Greek, not Alexandria, Jill. I'm asking for scripture that says that if the king doesn't let you leave, then his commands are invalid or something like that. Now, while you're thinking about that, I would like to finish the point that the analogy of a king forcing his subjects to obey, being moral, is similar at a lower level of a master forcing his servants to obey.
No, so your example would be Egypt. And the Pharaoh not allowing the Israelites to leave, that is immoral. Well, and God directly came against him, didn't he?
Let my people
he sent plagues and everything else. So there you go.
Well, that's different.
What is the evidence for the
difference? That's not different. That's exactly what you wanted, and that's what you got. There's your answer right there.
Do you understand why it's different?
I don't because they were not allowed to leave. But here's the thing, Bob. Here, let me explain why your analogy isn't.
Do you understand why?
No. Hold on. If I lend somebody a bunch of money, they can't leave and say they can't leave until I'm paid back. You can't say, "Oh, I just borrowed all this money, but now you won't let me leave. You're evil slave owner." Wait a minute. No. You made a deal.
Bernie, bro.
You pay me back. As soon as you pay me back, get the heck out of here. I don't even want you here anymore, but you need to pay me back. So you're trying to say, oh, they weren't allowed to leave. Well, of course they weren't allowed to leave as long as they were like still bound by whatever agreement they made. I don't understand what you're trying to argue there. That's nonsensical.
What about the word you're not thinking? Egypt is a bad example because God.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. God, the ultimate authority, sent
Can I
Moses
just-
to tell the Pharaoh to let his people go. This
Right.
is not the same situation as a kingdom that is not being commanded by God to let certain people go.
Yeah, but you're trying to use the same word to represent both scenarios, and that's where I'm saying I have a problem with that.
I think you're grasping for straws here.
Which word?
You said, is there a kingdom in which God says you should obey the king? Was that because it seems as though you're pivoting to something else now. I don't even know.
I'm saying, well, Jill, are you talking to me or Sam?
You, Bob.
Yeah, you.
Okay. I
What are you
affirm.
looking for?
Well, I asked, is it moral for a king to force his subjects to obey him?
Yes.
Sam said, right,
If
I
they
agree.
cannot leave, then yes.
Sam said if they can't leave, then it is immoral. And that's why I was asking Sam for scripture to show me that it is immoral for a king to force his servants to obey him and also not give them the option to leave.
Egypt.
He just gave you an
Pharaoh.
example.
But the
Boom.
point is what the context was when he
That's
said
Egypt
God
is
said-
not a good example because God himself, who is a
didn't
higher
mention-
authority, commanded Pharaoh to let him go.
You didn't.
Bob, I
mention-
just debunked you. Just don't
No,
be upset.
because the
It's fine.
context-
We're
God
good.
is not a higher authority than Pharaoh.
Your example didn't mention God. Now you're throwing God into
Yeah,
it.
you're moving the
Because we
goalposts,
brought up
Bob.
Egypt and Israel. Do you guys
moving
know how
the
to think? Do you have brains in your skulls?
Dude. You
Oh,
didn't
Use your
mention
brains and think.
You
Bob,
didn't mention
come
God.
back
Now
when you
you're
have
going-
an argument.
I have an argument and you guys aren't listening.
No, you're not explaining it, Bob. When you said that they were
Move
talking
the
about, we were
goalposts.
talking about the slavery, and it was about what made it slavery unethical, and it was supposed to be a comparison. I was thinking to the what made slavery in Israel bad, and so that's when you brought that up. So the question is,
I
what was
affirm
it-
slavery.
What? No, I know.
I affirm slavery.
Right, I know.
But
That's
they're
my point.
different scenarios. They deserve different words.
But it doesn't say they were let out of Egypt simply because they were slaves or something. It said they were oppressed, right? Or am I wrong? Maybe I'm wrong, but
It was the all of
Right.
all
God
of,
saw that
probably
his
all of
people
the
were
above.
being oppressed by Egypt, so God sent Moses to command
right,
Pharaoh to let them go.
given a rest or whatever.
No,
But-
Bob, they were freaking full-on slaves, dude. They were like being forced to make block when Moses showed up. They demanded that they
We're still there.
now had to find their own wheat. Also, it made it worse for them. What are you talking about? One
So
of
is
them
it the
got
slavery
beat to
that was
death.
bad?
Remember when
Or was
Moses stepped in? Like, what are you talking about? That was full-on slavery, like hard labor, beating them and everything. What are
So
you
is it
talking
that
about,
they were
dude?
enslaved that it was
What I'm
wrong?
talking
Yeah, dude. Come on. What are you talking about?
What about the when they won a war and they had took people into slavery? Do you think they wanted to be slaves? Do you think they could just leave and just start their
Well,
their
that's
tribe again?
that's different, Jamie. And
Why
that's what Jill
pivoted?
just because that's war. Like we do that today. We take prisoners of war.
You pivoted
But it's
from my
slavery.
argument.
But
But it's slavery.
that's prisoners of war. So not but I mean that's what I'm saying. Like you guys you're trying to use one word for all of these different scenarios.
Well, it's because that's the one because it's what makes them all similar. What they have in common that makes them all slaves.
No, they're all different. Like you've got prisoners of war, you've got people that are inmates, you've got people that are working off debts, and you have people that are actually literally slaves, and you're trying to call them all by the same name, and it's not
Just
right.
because you're owned
I mean,
by
the Bible
someone.
calls them all by the same name.
Just
Yeah,
because
that's why I'm really confused about this entire conversation. Anyway, I mean, Jill, you pointed out earlier that it's all about the context. I mean, it doesn't matter if we see the word slave here used in this context and the
Or it
word is the
does-
same word
or-
used over here.
I would even add to that. Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't
so let me
matter
give
if
you-
they're owned.
But whenever I'm in a debate with an atheist about this issue within the Bible, it doesn't bother me at all. I mean, they don't have that ability to try to stumble at any of us with the use of one word being used in different contexts, because we studied the scriptures and we can tell just by reading the context what's happening with this person versus this
Well,
person
see,
over here.
What I fear and what I don't like CJ's argument this is why. It's because they will take the fact that the person is being owned and they will suggest that this is chattel slavery. But simply in and of itself being owned we don't use that terminology today, even though we do still call NBA owners, but we technically do not call our employer our owner.
I think if we hold them accountable to practicing proper exegesis, then I don't think it would be a problem. I don't think that'd be a problem at all.
That's what I'm saying is they would read the context of slave. They would still read and see that ownership, property.
Well, to be fair though,
they will see those terms and they will associate those terms with chattel slavery or buying and selling someone who is being trafficked.
But that's what we step in and
really just one. Right. You were talking about how like you fear that the atheists might actually use this as to their advantage to imply that this is actually a forced thing. But I have two experiences so far. One personally where I debated the Raging Atheist, and then one where I watched Josh Bowen debate Michael Brown, where the premise was just simply accepted, and they asked the question, "Is this slavery ethical?" And we just moved past hang on real quick, right? We accepted that, and we just moved past and started explaining it, right? And I have yet to meet a single person, other than people who are explicitly in Rage's corner, and I know a significant number of atheists who are very willing to tell me when I lose, right? I have yet to meet a single person who watched that debate and thought anything other than obviously the biblical version of slavery is ethical. Because once you move past that baggage and actually meet these people on these grounds, right? They have no argument. There's no, because when they're sitting there trying to prove actually they were bought in Leviticus 25, you're just like, all right, I accept that, fine. But was this ethical?
I agree.
They flounder.
Exactly. I never have a problem when I'm into these discussions with an atheist regarding this topic because I think we work diligently in pointing out the context.
Yeah, I agree 100%, CJ. If you have time to do that in the debate, I agree 100% with your argument. I would argue the same thing, but I would then conclude that we would not call these people slaves today. I just take it a step further and say that we would not call understanding what you have described. And I watched your video where you mentioned mentioned my video where I said biblical slavery doesn't exist, and you said I hate that argument. That's fine, but I just take it a step further and say, therefore, if such is the case, if these people are here as hired workers, these are vets, therefore, we would never call them slaves today. Colloquially, maybe legally, I agree that legally they might be considered wards of the state if they were a prisoner or whatever the case. If that's the case, then biblical slavery, as we would define it today, does not exist, because we would not define a slave today as a hired worker.
Yeah, I would. Jill, I was with you until you said, again, biblical slavery doesn't exist. So what I would say is that biblical slavery exists, and it's not what you are thinking about because you think of American slavery. That's not what biblical slavery is.
I think the real question is whether or not God would...
My point is, don't say that biblical slavery doesn't exist, because biblical slavery does exist.
Yeah, see, if you define slave the way they defined it, then but we don't define slave the way they defined it.
Right, and that's your out.
That's why you have these discussions.
That's
when you say when you tell a skeptic that, hey, look, biblical slavery is not American slavery.
Right.
Then they're thinking, wait, what's the difference?
Right.
And then you tell them.
Yeah, that's another approach.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm not. That's not an approach that I would use. I'm not knocking it, but that's another approach you could take. I like CJ's approach, but I just take it a step further. It also does a little bit of gaslighting and gets people's attention. So that's why I'm doing.
I think it's the other way around that actually gets people attention, because when you kind of like what Bob was pointing out, when you're reeling people in, well, actually, maybe you're right.
Well, biblical slavery is moral. That's a good one. Biblical slavery,
right? But the atheist or the skeptic is already coming into the discussion with the idea that Christians promote slavery. So I think that goes back to the real question is whether or not God actually condones this act.
Well, and I can tell you right now for sure, I don't even say this as a brag because all glory goes to the Most High, of course. But I definitely make an impression on people when I kind of just eat this stuff, right? When I say, yes, the slaughter of the Canaanites was ethical. Yes, biblical slavery is.
Oh, yeah.
I do the same thing.
People know who CJ Cox is, even though I only have 300 subscribers.
Yeah, I do the same exact thing. Yep.
Exactly.
Especially
people
as a
know
black
who
man.
Bethel is, you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where it's like, it almost smacks him in the face with like, wait, did he really just say that?
Yep. I do it all the time. I know exactly what you mean. I do it all the time.
Did you see how many?
I'm not going to apologize about God's word ever.
Did you see how many libtards went nuts when I said, "Well, sure, we went into Germany in World War One." Well, the Canaanites were slaughtered by the Israelites. They try to paint the Israelites as some, tyrannical, beating people up.
Yeah,
and I said, well, we went into World War. We went and got Hitler, right? What? It's just seeing the chat just exploded. Like, Joe, how can you compare? Well, what's the difference? The Israelites were freedom fighters.
My problem is that when you say biblical slavery does not exist, that sounds like a contradiction to me. It sounds like you're denying what the Bible says.
I'm denying.
I know you're not.
The word I'm denying. Right. I'm denying the fact that the word slavery means what it meant to them. It doesn't.
That's like saying biblical homosexuality doesn't exist because people redefined homosexuality or something. And no,
it's not. Dude.
Let me.
Not even
I know it. I know it's not a good analogy.
It's a horrible.
It's just the first thing that came to my head. That's like wrong. Well,
so let me give you an example, Bob. Let's say on one hand I say, hey, I love my wife, and then I say I love my dog. And someone says, "Oh my gosh, you would do that with your dog?"
Both are true.
Well, see the problem. Both are true, but the context is missing.
Yeah,
that's what you fill in.
Right. Exactly. That's where you step in.
But then I'm also, if I'm to use both those definitions of love in the same sentence, then I'm falsely equivocating one of them. Well, I either love my dog and you need a different word to describe the relationship with my wife, or I love my wife and I need a different word to describe the relationship with my dog.
Go ahead, Jamie. Go ahead.
Well, let me just say this about the word biblical, because that needs to be defined. When we use the prefix or the suffix ICAL or CAL, it means more than what we might think. The suffix means basically that the pertaining to, or supportive of. So biblical homosexuality would not. It would be.
Yeah, that doesn't work. Yeah,
I know it was a horrible analogy. My point is that
there are some sexual dudes that are okay.
Jill, the way you just explained it, I think makes my point. Biblical slavery exists. If you say biblical slavery does not exist, it sounds like you're denying the Bible.
Well, and can I ask a point blank question, actually, that I asked Vocab Malone, and he kind of floundered, and maybe you'll see my point too. I hope you don't flounder like he did, but perhaps I think you kind of need to see the point not to. So I don't mean to get a gotcha question, but it is a little bit of a gotcha question. I just want you to be forewarned. So when you say biblical slavery exists and then it doesn't exist, excuse me. When you say biblical slavery doesn't exist and then proceed to argue, and by the way, any variation of that, biblical slavery doesn't exist or biblical slavery is not condoned or whatever it is, right? When you say that and then proceed to argue biblical slavery isn't the same thing as American slavery, aren't you contradicting yourself?
I don't argue that.
No,
I don't argue biblical slavery is the same. I
argue that not that it's the same. What I'm saying is
I don't argue that it exists. I say it doesn't exist at all. I don't compare biblical slavery to anything because it doesn't exist.
You don't ever like have when atheists say, oh, this is like what we did in the South. You don't ever say, no, what is described in the Bible is not the same thing as what happened in the South. That's not an argument you would use.
Right, because I make the distinction between someone who wants to work. If you ignore that distinction, they can play games with the text until you're red in the face. They're going to play games with the text and describe scenarios without making that distinction.
Can I present two premise syllogism?
Well, hang on, because I wanted to really quickly finish this point, because you just kind of changed what you were saying a little bit, Julie. Now you said you make the distinction, right?
Between
that's my point. When you make the distinction,
servitude. I don't call it slavery because we would never call someone who wants to go work for someone else and signs a contract, whether it be for life or it be for 7 years, we would never call that person a slave today. So I don't.
But the argument though that these two things aren't the same is irrelevant if one of these two things doesn't exist. You know what I mean?
I was gonna
agree doesn't exist. What I'm saying is, because we no longer define slavery as forced servitude or as anything other than forced servitude today, forced servitude was not condoned or supported or legislated even in scripture at all. Therefore, biblical slavery, as we know the word, as we define the word today, and again, you can't find me a slave who is not there involuntarily. There's no such thing as a slave today that is not working against their will. No such thing. Find me one. If imagine Moses coming back, stepping into the corridors of time, and God allows him to go into the future, not back, but back to the future, if you will. Imagine him walking into
Great Scott.
a home, a nursing home, and seeing a black woman with a servant's gear outfit on, something that a servant might wear. And imagine him calling her a slave. He might be, he would be fired from his job. Cancel culture would destroy it. So we no longer call these people slaves. So why are we suggesting that biblical slavery exists? I know what the Bible says. I know what the translators say. But that's just,
I don't see why that's a problem, though. I mean, because it's not changing the context of what's laid out in Scripture.
It's very simple. It's helping to understand contextually. That is what we need to be doing when we're looking at the word, the usage of the word.
But I mean, the atheist, regardless of the word,
two premises and a conclusion. One, biblical means to be in line with the teachings of the Bible. Mm-hmm. Slavery exists in the Bible and is defined by the Bible in its own terms. To say that, so the conclusion is to say that biblical slavery does not exist is a lie.
Slavery, biblical slavery, if you define slavery as an ancient Hebrew would, yes, that does exist. But again, I always specify that I'm defining slavery as we would define slavery today. That is why I would say biblical slavery as we define it today. This is why I always put that in there. I try to put it in there every time. Not in my titles on my videos, so I just want to trigger the liberal.
Hey, Jill, hold on.
Yeah.
Schmiday's Werben. How about you hop in here and tell us why slavery is wrong?
Smidday Woo?
Who's that?
Probably an atheist.
Is that a German phraseology?
Oh, he says here, it is just heartbreaking. Religion had polluted your minds
He hasn't
to a
been
degree
listening.
that you make excuses for slavery. Religion.
I'll let you feast on that atheist here. I gotta go to bed.
Yeah, I think I'll
Let's
go
talk
to
about
bed too.
what